It's Friday, January 8th, I think, 2021. And I am driving to California in my trusty BMW station wagon, towing a car dolly from U-Haul, because I'm going to Sacramento to pick up a project car. I'd spent much of the pandemic up to that point finishing up a Volkswagen bus project, and I was ready for something new. This 912 seemed perfect. The engine it came with wasn't original and was in pieces. It had some of the rust in the floors, rocker panels, suspension pan, and lower door lock posts that's typical in these cars, but it was pretty solid overall and seemed well worth saving. It was originally delivered in Moscow, Idaho, so I suspect it's been a West Coast car its whole life, maybe the reason for the relatively minor rust. I decided to restore it but keep as much originality as possible, basically a sympathetic restoration where I would fix only what was necessary. I also decided to do something kind of crazy, and something that, while I don't regret it, I will never, ever do again. The car was originally Irish green, but had been painted black at some point. Even not taking into account the bonkers decision to paint over Irish green, it was a pretty bad paint job. They didn't remove any of the trim as far as I can tell, and it didn't seem like they did a lot of prep work before spraying the car. I decided that I'd try to gently remove the black paint and see what kind of shape the green was in underneath. Before that, I started in on rust repair. The floor had a couple of holes where I would guess rainwater had collected over the years when the car sat unused. I put it on a rotisserie and replaced most of the floor with panels from Restoration Design. I didn't go all the way to the pinch welds because other than the spots where the holes developed, much of the floor was actually in pretty good shape, and I wanted to preserve as much original metal as I could. Next, I replaced the front suspension pan and gas tank support. While working in the area, I also replaced parts of the longitudinals and made other patches where I found rust or other previously done poor repairs. I spent a lot of time with a tram gauge and the factory dimensions to get everything aligned perfectly. After that, I repaired rust in the lower door lock posts, making additional repairs as needed underneath them. Then on to the rocker panels, which didn't need to be completely replaced, so I patched them using sections from new rocker panels to again preserve as much original metal as possible. I also made repairs to the fenders where needed when I had them off the car. I dressed and seam sealed all my welds and kept filler to a minimum, maybe a millimeter at its absolute thickest, anywhere I needed to use it. I think it's fair to say that this car is about as rust-free as a 912 gets, short of a total bare metal restoration. I have a new least favorite part of this, and that is these divots from the spot welds that hold this part of the cowl together. The black paint kind of collected in there. It is a long, boring process to get it out using acetone on a Q-tip. It's probably also worth noting that this is not something that you will ever see because it is behind the little grill here, the fresh air inlet. So you can make the argument that this is all unnecessary. But I figure I've come this far. On to the paint. I started on the roof and worked my way down. Other than a few brief initial passes with 400 grit sandpaper on a DA sander, I did this entirely by hand. Typically, I would remove the black paint by dry sanding with 400 until I got down to primer, at which point I'd switch to wet sanding with 1500. I experimented with using acetone, but decided it was too risky, with the exception being the areas that they hadn't primed. In areas like the underside of the hood and the door jambs, they'd just sprayed a thin coat of black directly over the original paint with apparently no prep whatsoever, which was great for me as it meant this came off easily with a little acetone. Unfortunately for me, despite it being an incredibly lazy paint job in which they even painted directly over the torsion bar covers, they did prime most of the car. So as you can imagine, this process took absolutely forever. A bonus of the minimal prep work that was done for the black paint was that the original paint was in pretty good shape. There were DA marks here and there, and areas where they had gone down to bare metal, but I would guess that maybe 80% of the original paint survived. That said, the areas where touch-up of the green was needed were scattered all over the car, with no panels being totally unscathed, although the passenger rear quarter was pretty close. The basic process I used after completely removing the black paint and primer from a section was as follows. Take any spot where the previous painters had gone through the green, or where it had been damaged, like these rock chips on the front bumper, down to bare metal. This looks insane, but I'm gonna go through now and dab epoxy primer into each of these chips. Coat this with epoxy primer, apply a skim of 2-part glazing putty over that, block it back smooth, apply a coat of high build primer, block that back, feather in new green paint with an airbrush, and blend the edges with spot blender. For all the touch-up, I used Glassroot single stage line 22 paint as original. I had this color matched to the original paint on the passenger side door. I didn't do the whole car at once, but rather section by section since I was doing other work at the same time. When it was all finally done, I shot everything with 3 layers of clear coat, which I tinted 10% with the same Glassroot Irish green paint I used for touch-up. Finally, I cut the clear with 1000, 1500, 2000, and then 3000 grit, and then buffed and polished the car. It came out great. It's not perfect. If you know where to look and look hard, you can find some flaws. There are a few places where the original paint was a bit thin, and you can see that through the clear in specific lighting conditions. There are also some scratches and sanding marks in the original paint that show through. But rather than a 10-footer, it's maybe a 1-footer. It's hard to show the flaws in photo and video, so I just wanted to be clear that while I think it looks really good and pretty much exactly as I'd hoped it would, it's not perfect by any stretch. As for everything else, it might be easiest to just go from nose to tail. Most but not all of the seals on the car are new. I replaced the sugar scoop headlights with H4s. The gas tank is new and sprayed with Worth Stone Guard, including a spot I had to touch up after scraping it on a speed bump. The fuel level sender is new. The dashboard wiring had been chewed by mice at some point, so I repaired all of that and fused the lights. The original fuse box had a short, so that got replaced. The front shocks are conies I rebuilt and the rears are NOS conies, and I completely rebuilt all 4 brake calipers and installed new pads along with new soft brake lines. I disassembled, inspected, and cleaned the brake master cylinder. The control arm bushings are all new, as are the ball joints. Inside, the headliner is new, although, annoyingly, I did put a small nick in it later on. I repaired and recovered the 68 only dashboard and knee pad in new vinyl, and punched all those speaker holes one at a time. The seats that came with the car were the right seats, but they were black, so I assumed they weren't the originals. The door panels are original, but only one of the 68 only door pockets was included, and it was no longer attached. I had that door pocket color matched and got some vinyl dye made, since none of the new upholstery I could find was a perfect match to the original color. I rebuilt and reupholstered the seats, adding some foam to support the aging springs, and fabricated and upholstered a new parcel shelf. The passenger side armrest is original, but I had to reupholster the driver's side. I found a black driver's side door pocket and dyed it to match the original brown, along with the seats, driver's armrest, parcel shelf, and rear seat backs. The lower rear seats are original. I got all the gauges working. The odometer was stuck and the gear was stripped, but I freed up the works and replaced the gear with one from a Mercedes speedometer that 15 years ago me had randomly picked up at a junkyard, despite not owning a Mercedes at the time. The clock was also seized up, but I got it working too, which for some reason was maybe my favorite moment of this whole project. I replaced the washer pump and washer nozzles. The original ignition switch worked, but would stick in the start position, so I replaced that, but will include the original in case it's repairable. The new ignition switch didn't include the function that allows you to turn the parking lights on when the car is off using the signal light switch, so I restored this feature using a 2-position relay. Everything with the exception of the cigarette lighter now works as original. As for the drivetrain, the car came with its original transmission, which was a 4-speed. I converted this into a 5-speed, and it shifted well, but it had some resistance coming out of 3rd gear that concerned me, and it also had the simplified differential, which has a bad reputation. I had a 66 5-speed lying around that appeared to have low miles, and definitely had the stronger early differential, so I disassembled, inspected, cleaned, and completely resealed that, installed it, and filled it with Swepco 201. It shifts perfectly. The entire clutch assembly is new, and the starter is a high-torque WASP unit. I also installed a hot start relay and replaced the heater hoses. I measured the case and crank on the engine that came with the car, and both checked out good. I built the engine using a big bore piston and cylinder kit and installed new rings and crank and rod bearings. I made sure the end plate was in spec, replaced all the seals, and did all the other basics of an engine rebuild. The cylinder heads I used are not the ones that came with the car. Instead, I used rebuilt heads I'd gotten in a separate deal. I rebuilt the Solex split shaft carburetors and spent a lot of time dialing them in. I also rebuilt the fuel pump and the small case generator the car came with. 1968 was a transitional year from the small to large case generators, so they can have either one. I originally reused the pushrod tubes that came with the engine, but ended up replacing those with precision matters units to eliminate a few oil leaks. The engine came with the dreaded 009 distributor, so I sourced a 061 as it would have had originally. A cold compression test showed 150 psi in cylinders 1, 2, and 4, and 160 in cylinder 3. I suspect it still has a bit of breaking in to do. The car runs and drives as I'd imagine it did when new. It steers and stops perfectly, and the suspension is firm but not terribly harsh. I have the conies at their softest setting, as recommended for a 912. In August of 2024, when the car was mechanically done but I was still working on the paint, I drove it from Portland to Boise and back, which is between 900 and 1,000 miles total, as an extended shakedown run. This drive includes going over the Blue Mountains, which the car handled with ease. Outside of a few small problems, which I easily and immediately fixed, it handled the whole trip flawlessly and was a lot of fun. This was a really satisfying and interesting project, even if my shoulders will probably never be the same again. To me, the car feels like it's unrestored, but was kept in really good shape while naturally aging a bit over the decades, and that's what I was hoping to achieve. I'd love to keep it, but circumstances have changed, and that's not in the cards for me right now. I hope whoever ends up with it appreciates and enjoys what originality I've been able to preserve, along with the longevity and reliability that should come along with all the repairs I've made.